Well, Happy New Year, everybody. Bill Plack here, Garage Talk on 303. We're not in the garage today. We're up in North Boulder talking to recently retired pro triathlete Justin Daerr. Justin, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
You piqued my interest when I saw your Facebook post the other day announcing your retirement, and I've actually never talked to you a whole lot, and I kind of feel bad now looking at some of your past accomplishments. And just I was doing the same Ironman you did in 2014 when you won Ironman Boulder, and but paths just haven't really crossed. And we talked before we got on camera here about some of our mutual friends with Ken Peterson and Chris Laferman, who both been on our show, and I'm so welcome. I'm glad to get the chance to talk to you.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah. So let's just dive in. What prompted you to make your big announcement that you were done as a pro triathlete?
Well, I kind of had in my mind that I wasn't really going to be racing beyond 2020 initially. Actually, at the end of 2019, I wasn't in a great spot, and so I was considering hanging it up then. My mind and my body were pretty shot. And but then sort of after I took a pretty long break in the fall of 19, I decided that I didn't really want to end things that way, and I was going to go into 2020 and kind of change my mindset a little bit and just be a little more relaxed and try to enjoy a final year in the sport. And so I had planned to race in Europe a couple times and never did, and so I decided that was going to be like the thing I was going to do for sure. I was definitely going to go race in Germany and do a couple other events and try to always, mix it up and try to have fun and then go out a little bit more on my own terms. And then things, as with everybody else, that just didn't really work out that way. So there was part of me that was thinking about, do I stick around? Do I try and do what I had in mind the next year? Ultimately, I think the only thing that was holding me on to not making the decision fully was more an emotional attachment. But I think from a practical standpoint, it was like I had planned to end this year, and the environment isn't exactly, race friendly, and so the things that I would want to do anyways are probably not too likely, and decided that, it's probably best to call it and just look back on, the good memories that I had and leave it at that.
So how long have you been a pro triathlete?
Well, I technically turned pro in 2006,
okay.
But I consider 2007 to be my first pro year because I was so terrible. I don't have like a lot of straightforward regrets. The one thing I in hindsight wish I had done would have been waited one more year to turn pro, mostly because I really would have liked to have gone back to Hawaii as an amateur and try and win the overall amateur race,
right,
which was much more of a possible goal and probably would have been a lot more motivating than like trying to not be the last pro at every race, which I pretty much was. Because I really, by the end of 2006, I was pretty down on myself. I was like, I don't really know what I'm doing or why I'm here, and maybe that ended up being a good thing because it kind of kicked me into gear into I got to start buckling down and taking things more seriously if I want to try and get somewhere in this.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that would just be basically 2006 through 2020, but more so to the 2007 is when I kind of felt like I was starting to be a little bit more competent.
So what would you say over that 13-year career would you say is your highlight? Is it Boulder?
I mean, Boulder is in terms of a result.
Yeah.
I think a lot of my best performances personally have the way that I describe it is I've had great races in the shadows of greater ones. So someone else is having a great day, and it just maybe my result isn't quite as reflective of how I feel about certain things.
Sure.
I think there's been a few races where I felt like I decided I really wanted to try and step up my progression and take some chances on myself, and those kind of vary across the years. If I had to pick some specific races, like 2007 Ironman Florida, it was my first top 10 as a pro,
Okay.
and it was my first time to break 3 hours on the marathon, which I'd been trying to do, and I only did it by 9 seconds. I would say 2009 racing Challenge Wanaka was the first time I tried to win a race. I ended up blowing up twice and finishing fourth, but I continued to basically, I was done. I had emptied every single ounce of energy out of my body, and that's a satisfying feeling of knowing,
Sure.
like, even if you fall short, it's okay. And 2011 Ironman Florida as well. That was the first time I got into that 2:48 marathon range, which is that 4-minute K range. That was like a big deal to me. And Boulder was definitely great in terms of I won. I also felt like it matched my output. Like I was racing hard and ready to go pretty deep, and to be able to win.
Hometown crowd, right?
Yeah, and that ended up being a lot more memorable than I would have maybe anticipated.
Yeah.
Like once I got out there and I started racing, and especially on the run, seeing so many people that had been a part of the journey, like
Right.
it was just really easy you were sharing what you were doing with a lot of people, and that was kind of building through the day in terms of like building me up, and people I trained with, massage therapists or
Right.
coaches, friends, family. Just everybody. So that was pretty special.
Yeah, so talk about that. We're in North Boulder here, and you've lived here, you said 13 years?
Well, so I came to Boulder when I was still in college. I went to college at Texas A&M. I'm originally from Houston, Texas. And between my junior and senior year, I actually had an internship at what was then called Inside Communications, which owned Inside Triathlon,
Okay.
Velo News, Velo Press, and I believe still like ski racing. And I had originally come in as meant to be like an Inside Triathlon more intern, but I worked under Charles Pelkey, who was an editor with Velo News at the time.
Yeah.
And mostly I was involved with like website content updating and that
And that was
sort
here
of.
in Boulder, right?
That was here in Boulder, yeah.
Yeah.
Their office was at like 55th and Arapahoe.
Yeah.
And I didn't know anything actually about websites, so I was like a history major, and
That's what I was going to say.
I didn't. I really was kind of, as I was getting towards the end of college, I didn't really know what I was going to do for a living, and I wasn't actually I was into triathlon, but more recreationally, and I thought, oh, maybe this is like a kind of just like an industry I could work in. And so I applied for an internship and got it, and came out and did some stuff, and kind of recognized that I mostly just wanted to race triathlons and maybe work elsewhere or something.
Yeah.
Like, everyone I worked with was great, but I just was I was more excited about being in the sport than covering it,
Gotcha.
at least at the time.
Yeah.
And so, but that kind of tied me into the community. And then later on, I came back for some time in the summers. And then in 2007, in April, I moved here full time.
Gotcha.
And I've been here ever since.
Did you move here with the idea of this being a great place to train and to be motivated by all the other triathletes here? And
Yeah, it was really just when I was trying to break into the sport, I was kind of following that nomadic lifestyle of like living in a room in Florida or Arizona for a few months, come here, kind of rotate around. And I was like, for me, it doesn't work. I was like, I need to be in one spot, living pretty simply and just going about my business, repeating it over and over and over again. And Boulder was the place that made me the most happy of all the places that I would go.
yeah.
And so when I was in college, I used to race like the local races against a guy named Kevin Burnett,
Okay.
who was going at the time. He's a few years older than me, so at the time he was a grad student at UT, and so we would meet up at races and race each other, and we were just kind of friends. Like we weren't close, but we knew each other. And in 2005, he moved out here because he started working at Velo News. He was their advertising. He worked in advertising, moved his way up. I think was eventually director. And so in 2007, I knew that he was living here, and I reached out to him and said, "Hey, do you have like a room available?"
Okay.
And he did, and that was great because it was really, I moved in with multiple different guys that were. They weren't racing pro, but they were all involved in cycling or triathlon, and just kind of, were roughly my age, give or take a few years, and they were great. We were all basically the same size bikes, so we could interchange bikes as well.
Oh, nice.
So we had like 4 guys with multiple bikes that they could use my TT bike, or I could use their cross bike or something.
Right. So you're here. What would you say to yourself now that you've been a pro now for 13, 14 years? Would you do it again? I mean, do you think being a pro triathlete is what you thought it would be?
I think the main thing for me was it was the first thing I did, and maybe the only. I mean, I didn't care about how much work it would take me to get better. Whereas I think there were a lot of other things. I kind of have like this mindset of I assess the situation, decide how much time I think it would take to get a return on it, and I'm like, not worth it. And I think I don't know, maybe the time I spent was or wasn't worth it is not really, but I didn't care.
Would you do things differently?
I probably, yes and no. There's kind of like, it's hard to really say that in a vacuum. Maybe I would have raced more at certain times. I think everybody gets influenced sometimes by what other people are doing well, right. And it may not necessarily apply to what would do well for me. And so I thought early on that I had a pretty strong constitution and always making decisions that I felt, even if they weren't what other people would have suggested, they worked for me. And there were times where I would get pulled from that and I'd have to redirect. And so I think most of the time I was able to always kind of right the ship and do what was best for me. But yeah, if I could have realized that sooner at certain times, it probably would have benefited me.
It's not an easy lifestyle in terms of, if you look at the business side of being a pro triathlete. Talk about maybe how the business side of pro triathlete compares and contrasts to this being an athlete,
right? And
some of the ratio of time spent just being a business versus time training, and how's that been for you over the last few years?
Yeah, so in the beginning of 2007, one of the reasons that I came out here for sure was Gordo Byrne had started Endurance Corner, and was wanting to start like a training squad, and so I came out kind of with that direction and shortly started working with Endurance Corner. And so one of my main jobs early on was primarily in kind of developing the events business side of things, so camps and clinics and those sorts of things.
For Endurance Corner?
Yeah, okay. Yeah. And I did a little bit of coaching. I didn't want to do a lot of coaching, so but I guess my point is that, like, while I was progressing as an athlete, I was also doing this work on the side.
Gotcha.
And I tried to never take on too much work that I would get complacent with the racing. So I felt it was really important for me to make sure that I had to earn money from racing and not just, I do all this other stuff and then I race and it doesn't matter if I don't do well. I thought it was really important to have, like, if you fail in the racing or you do poorly or you make bad decisions, it has financial repercussions. Maybe not one race, but 2 races, 3 races. You can't afford to, keep flying around and
right.
not doing well. And for me, I think that was really important because it put maybe a good amount of pressure on racing. Not so much that it was like make or break every time, but it definitely put enough on that I was like, I have to take things seriously, or I have to, maximize the budget that I'm working with traveling to races, what's going to get a return. So that pragmatic side of racing was always important and something that I did. I mean, I don't really think that I was as maximized on earning outside of the sport in terms of like sponsorship and that type of thing.
You have some sponsors.
Yeah.
On and Vintum was Shimano.
Yeah, Shimano was always big.
But you didn't have a huge list. Like it seemed like it was a fairly manageable list.
Yeah, and that was kind of it. In the middle, I had a little bit more. I thought it was, for me, I found that I really just wanted to invest my time into a handful of companies that I had a really good, strong relationship with, and keep working on that. And then outside of that, I would invest time in my outside business and with Endurance Corner and some of the other things I was doing. And so that was kind of, maybe other people would have used that time to garner more sponsorships or do that sort of thing. So I think either way would be fine.
So you're happy with how things have gone over the years, basically?
Yeah, I mean, it's ultimately, I think the most important thing for me was I didn't feel like there was ever a lack of effort in what I was doing.
Yeah.
I mean, I will always wish that I was better. They'll never stop. Like,
right.
I will always wish that I could have been faster or better, either on certain days or across the whole career. But I don't think it was from lack of trying.
Right.
I did what I could.
At some point, you reached the level of your best.
I mean, there's, unfortunately, there's always someone faster usually. So
yeah, that's pretty much the case. I did notice on one of your Facebook threads, I think it was this one, that Peggy Shockley thanked you for racing her race at Lake to Lake. Was that something you did most consistently? Was that a consistent race for you?
I've probably done it like 5 or 6 times maybe. I did it that summer. I had an internship, which may have been the first year.
Okay.
2002.
Okay.
It may have been around a year before that. And then I did it again when I lived here, maybe 2009. I think was the first time I did it again when I lived here. And then actually what I did was Endurance Corner used to have a Boulder camp here every June.
Okay.
And starting in, I think, 2011, I made the last day of the camp Loveland Lake to Lake.
Oh, okay.
So we did that for 2 or 3 years.
What are some of your favorite local races?
That would definitely be one. I mean, I think it's such a like a fun, dynamic bike course, and they closed down that Wilson Road or Taft or whatever it's called at that point, I just think it's a lot of fun. It's like a local race, and then it has a great buffet afterwards.
Right, exactly.
Like that buffet is. I've actually talked about people. I'm like, don't leave. Like, definitely go to the buffet afterwards.
You're right.
I'm like, it is a legitimate
Yep.
like sit down meal.
That's true.
And I think that goes a long way when people are kind of just like tossing you a banana or something. Like, it's a pretty easy way to differentiate yourself.
Or a slice of Domino's pizza.
Yeah, exactly.
I was like, get done with an Ironman. I'm like, really?
Yeah.
What other ones didn't come to mind? Did you do like the Peak when it was at its heyday?
Yeah, I did. I did the Peak. I never did well there. I always did very, very poorly. Especially when it was a pro race and you had to do the out and back runs.
Oh yeah.
That was miserable. Actually, the very last time I did it, when you had to do that, it was not the old stage year because it was 2014, so the flood had damaged it, and so we just did the loop. And I had a pair of, most of the time when I've raced, particularly in the last decade or so with cycling shoes, I typically use like more traditional road styles as opposed to like a one strap triathlon shoe.
Yeah.
But I had a triathlon shoe that I really didn't train in or use very often, but I was like, well, I'm doing an Olympic distance race, so I'll use it for this race. And I started the bike and I ripped both straps like off the shoe probably because I was so stressed trying to keep up. And so I broke both the tops of the shoes. So I did the race without basically, like, I had shoes on, but they weren't tight.
Yeah.
And so I actually rode okay for maybe 30 minutes, and then I was totally gassed. And But so yeah, I did it. I did it a number of times, both as an age grouper. In 2002, I did it as an age grouper, and then did it as a pro. I don't know, 3 or 4 times.
Did you ever do
maybe.
the high V?
No.
That was always a good one for that distance for money, I know.
Yeah. No, I never. I mean, I you know, in the early days of the sport, when I was in Texas, there was tons of local racing, and you know, between sprint to Olympic and anything in between, there were lots of odd distance races. You know, like 1K swim, 30K bike, 7K run, stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I did a lot of that. And in fact, I would generally use that as like, if it was the summer, I mean, that would kind of be the hard training. I would sort of race on the weekend, train kind of Tuesday to Thursday, moderately, race again on the weekend. And that was, that was fun. That was good at gaining experience and stuff. But once I became pro, I still did some shorter races if they were local, but in Colorado, it's a little like the season's shorter and the venues there's not that many water venues and stuff like that. So, but I've done some of like the Racing Underground races at Cherry Creek or that old Rattlesnake triathlon down in Aurora. I did that once. I did Harvest Moon once or twice. I can't remember. So I have done those, but they would need to fit the schedule or whatever, depending on what the year was.
So what do you think of the sport of triathlon, from when you started to where it is now? And I'm kind of thinking of a current thing with the Daytona and the whole PTO, and where is that fitting in with the spectrum of the sport? Do you see it growing in a good way, or has it changed a lot, or what's your view?
I think PTO is a great thing. I think, having a group that wants to promote the professional side of racing, I think some people have seen it as sort of kind of opposing something like Ironman, but I don't think that's the case. I think they want to work with them. They just want to use it, allow the pros to maybe have a collective voice instead of kind of individuals ringing in on certain things. So, because I think that, if you can raise the profile of professional racing, then it could in turn help Ironman overall, not just.
I agree.
So, whether I think the Daytona situation needs to be seen, like having this race has a lot to do with COVID, right? The original plan was Collins Cup, but I thought PTO did a good job at the end of the year getting creative, putting prize purses at the races that could happen, and getting some people out to them, and then having this Daytona event where they could fly in pros, allow them time to, be in the States, be in one place, have the race, and then because of those circumstances of the venue, they were able to give it really good coverage and kind of broadcast that out. But I think going forward, it would definitely be like PTO would want to have a more kind of collective bargaining agreement, for lack of a better word, with Ironman or whomever, just to be kind of part of the process.
Are you kind of bummed they weren't around maybe a few years ago when you?
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Because I think the money's there.
I definitely think it would have helped.
Yeah.
But I want to see if there's anything I would say, it wouldn't want to be, just looking back on my time and being like, oh, that was the best time. Like, I would want the best time for professionals to be now and tomorrow, not yesterday.
Right.
So if this can help them propel the sport forward, that would be what I would want to hope more than anything.
Well, that's a segue I wanted to get to a little bit. When you look at your career, is there anything that you would say you've learned about yourself, or maybe gained something about yourself that will help you in the next, whatever the next chapter?
I think the way that I explained it one time when the similar question was asked was, I just kind of have an expectation that things that want to get done will be hard. So sort of I think that I won't go around thinking that I can have success in something and it'll come easily.
Right.
So there'll be like, no, you need to be committed time-wise or resource-wise in order to have success. And if it doesn't require that, that's a bonus, but that will be like the starting point. I think maybe 20 years ago, I was looking for the thing that would come easily, as opposed to maybe deciding like that's probably doesn't exist.
I mean, I'm sure you're obviously athletic. Were you a very athletic kid? Did you play a lot of sports?
No.
No?
So the only thing I did was I played Little League Baseball to like 14. And then in high school, I started kind of working out on my own in the gyms.
Just working out though,
like lifting weights and things like that. I didn't play any organized sports. I did I ran, but not there. In Houston, there were two places that I would run. Primarily, it was Rice University, which has a 2.9 mile loop around it. That would be what I ran.
Okay.
Or Memorial Park, which is also a 2.9 mile loop. I don't know why we can't get 3 miles, but we can't. So, but that was a little further away, kind of from where I grew up, so I didn't run there. That's a better place to run than Rice, but Rice was really close to where I lived. So, so there might be times where I ran, a few days a week, but then there'd be times where maybe a month went by. So it wasn't really until I got to college when, so I was at Texas A&M my first semester. There was, at the rec center, there was like a flyer that said there was this group that was going to run the Austin Marathon. And they were going to get together and basically they'd give you a training plan, which was a sheet of paper that just had numbers on them on what you would run per week, like 3, 5, 3, 10. So it was 3 midday week distances and 1 longer run.
Okay.
And the longer run was done as a group, and they would pick a route and you'd run it. And I guess there was like maybe 18 weeks, or I don't know, it was probably early October, and the race was President's Day. Right. So I don't know how many weeks that is, 15, 18, something like that. And it said you need to be able to run 5 miles to start it. And so I hadn't been running at all. So the perimeter of the lower A&M campus is like 4.8 miles. And so I went out, I think this group was getting together like on Saturday, and this was maybe Wednesday night at 10 p.m. I went out and ran a 4.8 mile loop, and I was like, okay, I can run this loop, so I'll join this group.
Okay.
So I joined the group and did the program, and it's kind of funny because I would, a lot of times if there was those 3 runs during the week that I was supposed to be doing, it would be like Wednesday night when I would start them and get the 3 runs in. Or like I'd be doing the third midweek run on Friday at 7 p.m. Before the Saturday long run. So, but it worked for me. The simplicity maybe set the tone for kind of don't make things overly complicated when they don't need to be.
So you weren't a prodigy cyclist or runner or anything. You just kind of.
No. So I ran that marathon in 4 hours and 14 minutes.
Okay.
So and that was at 19 years old.
Okay. So would you say you're a competitive person? I mean, obviously you compete, but would you call yourself?
I would not.
You would not?
I would not. So the way that I would define, so my wife is highly competitive.
Okay.
And the way that I explain it to her as an analogy is like when you play cards with a competitive person, if the competitive person beats me 50 times in a row and I beat them once, it will make them just as frustrated as if I had beat them 51 times in a row. And so that's kind of that to me is like a competitive mentality. There is no, oh, that's good enough sort of thing. So I definitely feel as though I was competitive with myself and driven, and I am obviously competitive when I was racing, but it was not across the board in every aspect of life. Yes, maybe the things that I put a lot of time into, I want to do really, really well.
Yeah.
But it's not, if I'm playing, pool billiards or something, I don't really mind. If there's something that I'm not doing competently, I'm not really that concerned about not being good at it. So,
but even during like an Ironman or something, did you have that I'm going to get that guy mentality, or was it more I'm just going to kill myself and see what happens?
It might depend on the person. I mean, I think there's
had a couple rivals maybe.
Yeah, just kind of. There's definitely people that you want to beat. Right. Period. Or you just ultimately. Racing people is what gets the most out of you. I mean, you can't if you look at, or if I think back on days that I'm really proud of, it's because I had really great competition, and they brought the most out of me as much as I did myself. That's what you need to have a really memorable day. Is it doesn't come from, oh, I had a 30-minute lead and I was like, that's not really where you really find what you're capable of. What you find what you're capable of is when really great competitors push you to your limit.
You've done some other things in your life, obviously. I've seen a couple things on Facebook where we talked earlier about you did the Thames River, you swam on that. I saw an Everesting thing you did in Utah a couple of years ago before Everesting was kind of talked about as much as it is now. What other fun stuff have you done that you find fulfilling in that same way?
That was sort of a unique thing because I'm coaching someone who we're trying to do the English Channel crossing.
Okay.
We actually went in 2019, did not get a weather window and had to fly home.
Okay.
In 2020, we had another window and COVID happened. So we're trying to get a window in 2021.
Okay.
To get over there.
Will you be on the support boat for that?
Yeah, correct. Yeah. So the reason for that Thames trip was we both went over there to do that event, as he does multiple long open water swimming events, but also to recon, for me to get kind of a visual of what it was we were dealing with.
Okay.
So we actually went to Dover, took the ferry to Calais, saw the landing, came back, and so
Gotcha.
That may not be necessary to prepare, but it was a nice thing to do given the opportunity.
Yeah.
And then 2929, the Everesting event, that was something that a friend of mine was involved with them and had brought up the idea of going out there as a guest speaker. So I came on as a guest speaker, and I didn't have to do the event, but I decided I really wanted to do the event, especially because at the time, so for those who don't know, the 2929 event, they do Everesting on a mountain that has a gondola. So they will climb the segments, but then descend via the gondola, so you don't trash your legs.
I see.
And
I was wondering about that.
Yeah, and so they rent a ski hill area that's conducive to that. So it started in, I believe, Killington, Vermont.
Okay.
And then the second event was in Snow Basin in Utah.
Okay.
And those two events continue, and then they're adding one in Sun Valley.
So that's a thing.
Yeah, it's a business now.
Oh, that's
and
interesting.
an event.
And you hiked it though.
Correct. So
Yeah.
you hike. I think in Snow Basin it takes 13 legs.
How many vertical then? About.
So it's 29,000, 29
No, but
feet.
I mean, so it's what?
So each
three-
vert
three-
is
three-
2,500
Yeah.
maybe. I mean, if you think about
That's a long.
pretty legitimate ski hill,
Yeah, right.
like in the West, what that would be.
That'd be hard.
It was hard. I mean, it wasn't really something that I think people really knew what to expect, nor did I. And that was really why I wanted to do it, because I was like, I kind of have in my head how this would go, and I would like to do it to then in the future be able to speak to what to expect or how it could be improved and whatnot. And it wasn't it's not a race in the sense, I mean, obviously someone still finishes first,
Right.
but it isn't a race. For some people, a lot of people don't even make all 13 attempts in the time limit,
Yeah.
because it's basically a 36-hour window
Okay.
that they allow nonstop.
Okay.
So some people are going through the night and whatnot.
I want to try that. That sounds kind of fun.
And so, yeah, it's it was different. It was fun. One thing that I have suggested to people, kind of generally speaking, is that you should, if you're in triathlon and you're investing a lot of time in being fit and those sorts of things, there's other things you can do that you can use all that time to take on these other adventures, and you can use that fitness in other ways to have fun and so don't always limit yourself to that. I mean, other people there probably aren't that many people that are just like Everesting training. So if you're a really fit triathlete, you can probably do this without too much specific training, and that's something that whether it's that or maybe ski randoneering or other things that have some crossover benefit where you can really have some fun and branch out a little bit.
Mix it up a little bit.
Yeah.
So segue to that a little bit. You've mentioned two things. You do coach,
Mm-hmm.
and is that something you're going to focus more on as a retired triathlete?
I mean, I'm not planning to expand it. So I work with 7 to 8 athletes at a time.
Okay.
And so I might bring that up a little bit.
Okay.
I've been taking on. I've done some pro bono projects in the last 2 to 3 years.
Okay.
And so I'm trying to maybe formalize that a little bit more.
In what kind of project?
So I worked with an athlete doing Olympic trials marathon. So she was trying to qualify and then race it. And then right now I'm working with somebody who's trying to do really well in indoor rowing.
Oh, really?
So one of the things is I try to align the pro bono projects with something that also forces me a little bit out of my comfort zone.
Sure. Yeah.
So we kind of have I'm learning with them, and in return we can kind of
Sure.
work on some different things. But so I sort of was doing this on kind of an ad hoc basis, but I was thinking about formalizing it a little more and maybe trying to kind of open it up more publicly to say, like, hey, let's get together and do some different work to combine with the triathlon coaching that I do.
Have you done some formal training for coaching, or is this more just as you've learned over the years, being coach probably and some other things?
I mean, not like going to school or anything like that. No.
Yeah.
My first sort of coaching experience was actually in college. I helped start like a beginner's triathlon clinic that was, 7 to 8 weeks long. And then starting in 2004 was the first time I had a one-on-one client and started working with people. And that was still kind of informal. More when I started working with Endurance Corner is when I started a more formal taking on different athletes and working with them on a more continuous basis. But
Yeah.
I would say people I've been coached by have influenced me, certainly. I worked with Joe Friel for several years, and he was that was as much a mentorship and coaching as it was in being coached.
I mean, he's one of the stalwart gurus,
yeah,
obviously.
And I worked with Cliff English for the longest period of time, which was 2011 to 7, so like 8 seasons or something, 7 or 8 seasons. And then at the end of my career, I worked a bit with Allison Powers, she was a national champion cyclist, and so that helped broaden my horizon. But ultimately, I think, I was always looking for things that would help me improve, and so, and then also seeing what worked with athletes. So I think my involvement with racing was helping coaching, because I was often learning and applying new and different things with them, and because I was motivated to improve myself, that in turn helped motivate me to improve other people by default.
Yeah, that's interesting. So is there anything in your future that is completely not physical related, triathlon, endurance, that you hope to really pursue in your life?
I don't know professionally. My other interests are...
You're a history guy, right?
I'm a big history guy. That was actually kind of... when I was in undergrad, I was considering going kind of the PhD history route.
Yeah.
In the end, I kind of decided that history is more something I enjoyed. I sort of, whether correctly or not, I kind of saw the PhD route as maybe being something that might ruin that. I was like, I think just learning about it on my own terms was maybe how I wanted to continue.
Is there a period of history that you love a lot?
I've been so when I was in college, A&M's history undergrad program was just real laissez-faire. They didn't really say, oh, you need to take these courses. They basically just said, other than a handful of basic world and U.S. history classes, you had 30-something hours to take whatever you want.
Yeah.
And so I found that I centered around the Civil War era, just because there started to be a lot of overlap, and it made classes more interesting and honestly easier if you kept like learning on top of learning, because you had the background knowledge. You weren't trying to figure out like a period of time that you really if you just take a snapshot of like the 1840s and you don't have a lot of context, then you're really learning everything from start. But if you've taken a class on that and then it goes into the 1850s, then you know what happened, that sort of thing. Lately, in the last 2 or 3 years, I've been kind of founding of the country focused. So I've been reading a lot of early presidential history, constitutional history.
We've lived a really interesting part of that in the last few days.
So it's it's very relevant.
Yeah.
So that is kind of, so I have been U.S. history centric, but and then if there was another area, a little, like, I have a little bit of knowledge of British history, but nowhere in, I do have an interest there, and it has obviously a big influence on what's happened here.
Right.
So British history is American history in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Or vice versa. So, but there's, I mean, the more you know, the more you realize you don't know anything. So there's just more and more like nuances and little things. I mean, you could spend your whole life studying like one side of one battle, and that could be like your thing that people come and talk to you about.
Well, it sounds like you're just a person that quests knowledge all the time.
Yeah, the history piece just kind of, that was always sort of there. My mom is from Sweden, and so I used to go back there, and you know, going back to Europe, I'd be able to see really old things. I loved going to old castles or old forts, and my dad is a Vietnam veteran, and I was really interested in kind of military history as a result of that. And I sort of coincidentally had a handful of friends whose dads had all served in Vietnam, so it sort of seemed normal to like, oh, you're like, everyone's dad was in war or whatever.
Right.
Obviously that wasn't the case, but just within my little 6, 7, 8-year-old thinking, that was like, oh, that's what happens.
Right.
And so, and then Texas itself with the, you know, pre-America revolution in the 1830s, has interesting stories. And that was a period of time where there was this like made-for-TV movie called 13 Days to Glory that came out in 1987 maybe, about the Alamo. And I used to watch it over and over and over again. And so I think for whatever reason, stuff in the past was just interesting to me, and there was no other reason that I was interested. I didn't really, you know, other things I'm not interested in. So.
Sure. Well, I think I appreciate your time, and it's been fun to get to know you a little bit better, and it's going to be fun to see where you end up on your journey in the next however many years. And if you could maybe just wrap up and maybe offer, if you will, a nice little tight, this is what I learned, and if you're new to triathlon or thinking about triathlon, maybe this my advice to you kind of thing.
Well, one thing I'd say is you got to do the work. I think in this day and age, there's a real trend, not in triathlon, but just in general, of kind of finding like the shortcut or the easy way, and you're going to have to put in the time. So the first thing I would say is make sure that you enjoy it. So, you know, maybe it's not the case now, but there was a period of time it sort of seemed like people went from, I haven't done anything, to maybe I want to do an Ironman or whatever. And, you know, if you're going to spend a lot of time riding a bike or running or swimming, you know, make sure you enjoy it first. So it's, you know, kind of maybe hang out and have some fun. And then if you know that you enjoy it, then the work that's required to get better will be enjoyable. The process will be maybe not enjoyable like drinking beer with your buddies, but it'll be fun in a different sort of way,
Right.
And perhaps very satisfying. And I would just say also that the period of time it takes to improve and excel is different for everybody. So it doesn't mean that you won't get there, but you may get there sooner or you may get there later than your counterparts. And so stay focused on yourself and what works for you, and not get too caught up in what everybody else is doing.
Maybe don't follow everybody on Strava and get frustrated when you see people doing this and that, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, people share a lot of stuff now. And when I started, the only way you knew someone had been training hard was when they raced.
Right. Right.
And so, yeah, it can be really easy to get caught up in that, myself included. So
Yeah.
that's not something to beat yourself up about. But, you know, if you find yourself a little bit too overly consumed in what everyone else is doing, then it's okay to take a break. You can remove an app from your phone for a little while, maybe
Right.
reset
Yeah.
or whatever. So.
Well, thanks for your time, and congratulations on an awesome career, and thanks again for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.